I want to caution you that there will be a slight change to the session this morning. I'm aware that everyone has got the program of the proceedings. We will now start off with the President because the President has got to leave to go to Cape Town, and the Deputy Mayor will welcome us after the President has spoken. So bear with us as we try and navigate our program this morning. We are just waiting for an indication, and as the President has ascended the stage, we'll play the national anthem, African Union, and then South African national anthem. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, may we all rise and welcome our State President. Let's give them a warm round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome. We can continue doing it until they circle down at the stage and get it louder and louder and louder and louder and louder and louder. And louder. Thank you very much. You may be seated, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, without much further ado, we'll rise for the AU anthem.
Together to defend our liberty.
Thank you. You may be seated. His Excellency, the President of South Africa, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, KZN Premier, Baba Willis Mtunu Matingwane, MEC, Mr. Sihle Zigalala Kuzeni, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Wife, Pfizer PM, Chairman of the African Renaissance, Dr. Sbusiso Ndebele, Dr. Martin Davis of Deloitte Africa, senior members of government present and business fraternity, ladies and gentlemen, we extend a very warm welcome to you all. Dumelang, Molweni, Sanmonani. It is indeed our absolute pleasure and pride to host the African Renaissance Festival 2018. Each year, the African Renaissance Festival is held during the month of May to coincide with Africa Day celebration throughout the continent, and we are proud that this is the 20th edition of this prestigious annual event, which has attracted the attention of the media and participants from around the globe. Our theme for this year, Inclusive Social-Economic Transformation, has much relevance and application to both our country and our province of KwaZulu-Natal. This year also marks the centenary of the birth of Albertina Sisulu and Nelson Mandela, who incidentally was the speaker at the inaugural African Renaissance when we started in 1999. A call by Nelson Mandela Foundation for people to make a difference and help build the legacy Mandela would be proud of is a sentiment which is very part of the festival's ethos. We wish to extend our sincere appreciation to the sponsors of this 20th annual festival, KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Government, eThekwini Municipality, MTN, Aspen Pharmacare, Durban Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and media partners Ukhozi and East Coast Radio, without whose generosity this event would not be possible. Furthermore, I would like to thank the African Renaissance team members who have worked long hours in making sure that this 2018 festival extends your expectations. I would like to personally thank and welcome all speakers and conveners of the session and the conference delegates who have joined us here in Durban. This event is only truly a success because of those who can participate, like yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. We look forward to an engaging program, and I'm sure that all present will benefit from the networking insights and opportunities shared. Without further ado, I would now like to introduce you to the Premier of the Province of KwaZulu-Natal, whom I will request to ascend the podium to introduce our State President. Matingwane.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Professor Sihauban Boku. Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, former Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, who is also our former ambassador in Australia, but who is also the chairperson of the African Renaissance, His Excellency Mr. Sibusiso Ndebele. MEC for Economic Development, Tourism and Environmental Affairs, Honorable Sihle Zigalala, Deputy Mayor of eThekwini Municipality, Councillor Fozia Pierre, members of the Provincial Executive Council present, convener of the ANC Provincial Task Team in KwaZulu-Natal, Mr. Mike Mabuyakulu, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the business community, and I can cite amongst you quite a number of you. That includes my co-chair to the KZN Broad Coalition, Mr. Moses Tembe, as well as the chairperson of the Durban Chamber. Honorable guests from all your walks of life, ladies and gentlemen, as I greet you, I stand here honored to be part of this wonderful occasion that for the 20th year in succession is being held here in our city of eThekwini in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. On behalf of the government and the people of KwaZulu-Natal, I wish to welcome all our guests to this conference. In particular, we would like to welcome all our international and continental visitors from the rest of the continent and the world. We value your presence here and we look forward to your regular visits in the future. But we also take this opportunity to congratulate Mrs. Sibusiso Ndebele, who was the brainchild to this African Renaissance Conference that today is 20 years old. Congratulations, Mazalkos. As KwaZulu-Natal, we see the African Renaissance Conference as an opportunity to pay tribute to the continent of Africa and to rekindle our commitment to its future growth and development. Beyond the geographical links, we remain linked in many ways to the continent. Our own provincial economy, which is based on the eastern tip of Africa, plays a critical role not only in the national economy, but also in the region. We are linked not only through history, politics and culture, but also the economy and trade. In this regard, in March this year, we were very pleased to renew our Memorandum of Understanding with the province of Maputo to run until 2023. Our MOU with Maputo covers collaboration in the following areas: tourism, economic development and promotion of commercial investment, agriculture and environmental affairs, aquaculture, transport and logistics, arts and culture, education, youth sports and recreational activities, health, security and protection, governance, human settlements, and social development. We are currently exploring similar agreements with provinces in the rest of Africa, particularly those with which we share developmental trajectories, but also similar patterns of economic exclusion and poverty. We will continue to identify several opportunities for economic cooperation and sharing best practices regarding the resolution of socio-economic development issues, the creation of jobs and addressing inequality. We will continue developing our own industrial capacity, agro-processing, beneficiation of what mineral products we have, exploring science and technology, as well as infrastructure development opportunities. Program Director is KwaZulu-Natal. One of our major natural advantages is finding ourselves on the Indian Ocean rim, For this reason, we potentially have access to the abundant resources of the ocean, including fisheries, offshore oil and gas, tourism and maritime industries. Between them, our ports of Durban and High Reaches Bay Harbour handle over 60% of the country's seaborne cargo. In spite of this, our maritime industry is characterized by significantly low levels of participation by the majority people in this province. We believe that unexplored as it is, the ocean's economy in all its variations presents one of the greatest opportunities for economic growth and development of our province and country. By the same token, if planned properly, this industry holds untold opportunities for the economic inclusion of the majority to the mainstream economy. We are hopeful that the Blue Ocean's economy, coupled with a national policy shift towards the use of gas, will also boost our national and provincial economy. Program Director, our ports are also natural sites for growth in sectors such as shipbuilding and repair, and oil and gas support. We have no doubt that when oil rigs start visiting our coastline on a regular basis, this industry will grow exponentially. As we stated during the State of the Province address, we stand ready to take advantage of these and other new opportunities and a chance to redirect and recharge our economic growth. We, however, cannot ignore some worrying trends which, if left unattended, have the potential to derail the working relationship with our social partners and neighbors, as well as our march to economic growth. Recently, organized business in KwaZulu-Natal expressed alarm at what they call the escalation of uncertainty linked to the following recent events: the banning of trucks on the N3 Moy River toll gate, which disrupted traffic and affected a number of sectors; construction sites invasions, extortions and rising tensions in townships among local traders; attack at the mosque in Verulam, and political killings that are occurring in our province. As a provincial government, we consider these and similar incidents in a very serious light. Although we are still going to meet with the business sector, and we do have plans scheduled for that, but I do want to share here on this platform that in this regard, during SOPA, we committed to hold a series of stakeholder engagements with a cross-section of the KwaZulu-Natal community. These engagements were identified, amongst others, sectors such as faith-based organizations, traditional leaders, and business. To this end, we will, within 30 days, convene a meeting of strategic stakeholders in the business sector. We are keen to hear from organized business and our social partners who are organized, labor and civil society on the growth and development of the economy. With regard to political violence, I can also confirm that we are expecting the report of the Moirane Commission into political killings by the end of this month. As you may be aware, the President has also instructed an interministerial team of the security cluster to urgently look at political killings in the province. Mr. President, we applaud you for your leadership on this matter, and we will provide all the necessary support as work is being done in this regard. With regards to calls by the Northern Region Business Association to shut down spazas owned by fellow African migrants, as government we have made it very clear that the law must be kept at all times. At a meeting held on 15th May in Kwamashu, we established a task team made up of all sides to update the database of spazas in the Inanda and Kwamashu area with a view to identifying illegal ones. We agreed that no individual or group has a right to shut down any business. We also agreed that all unregistered spazas will be closed down following a legal process led by the City of eThekwini. However, we want to introduce a system of regulations which will ensure that there is order in the operations of these mini shops. We will not allow uncontrolled mushrooming of the spaza shop again in eThekwini. This is because we have identified this as the primary factor causing tension between South African-born traders on one side and the Somalis and Ethiopians in particular on the other side. I must reassure all and sundry that this conflict has nothing to do with xenophobia, but is a struggle over limited resources in the townships and the limited market. Importantly, we intend assisting the sector with sustained support and ranging from training to finance. We have also agreed in the long term to examine complaints about the negative impact of malls on local businesses. We are in the meantime, through economic development, tourism and environmental affairs, piloting a revolving loan project and will soon finalize a bulk buying support program for small businesses. On 24th May, which is today, will be the we are supposed to have updated all our progress in this matter. But yesterday, I'm aware that the MEC for Economic Development already held a meeting with the warring parties in that area. We wish to urge all sides to exercise restraint and to allow us to address the issues that have been raised during recent consultations. Concerning blockading of the N3 toll plaza, we have convened an urgent meeting with the truck operators and will soon be meeting with the drivers. We have identified the issue as relating to the employment of foreign drivers. While we discuss the matters with the relevant departments, including Labour Department, we have now focused our security cluster on the N3 corridor and are engaging the local community to ensure that the past events are not repeated. No roads must be blockaded or property banned just because there are grievances of any kind. Program Director, I've used this platform to provide some update and to assure you and the people of KwaZulu-Natal we cannot afford the undermining of our economic growth plans, as these incidents are threatening to do so. This includes invasions and extortions that are carried out throughout the city by a group demanding empowerment and inclusion in major projects. We will not allow any incursions into infrastructure development projects in our province for any reason. As the MEC for HR has indicated before, we have established structures for engagement with business and stakeholders, and we would like this to take precedence. While we are generally in agreement that transformation must take place, this must never disturb the smooth functioning of our economy. We are therefore, as we engage with the business sector, listen to their concerns, listen to their views on solutions, but also together find the best way of ensuring that there is stability, which we should all together work towards, but also together make sure that there are new and innovative ways of how economic transformation will be executed. Program Director, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, my major task this morning was merely to set the scene for His Excellency the President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Cyril Mandela Ramaphosa, to address this gathering. And I now need not wait further and waste more time, seeing that none of us do not understand the biography of Mr. Ramaphosa anymore. If you don't, I'm sorry, but you can go through some of the important pages in your IT. You'll find it. The President is on the rush. Let's allow him space to address all of us. I ask, therefore, that you all stand to welcome to the podium His Excellency, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, who I now have the pleasure to call to this platform. Your Excellency.
Thank you, thank you. Let us be seated. Program Director, the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, Mr. Willis Mkhunu, MEC of Economic Development and Tourism, Mr. Sihle Zikalala, the founder and originator of this lecture series 20 years ago, who is still here with us, who we applaud and thank for having initiated this. Let's give him a round of applause. The Vice Chair of African Renaissance, Professor Ngubane, the Deputy Mayor of our city, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank the African Renaissance Trust for this invitation to once again participate in this celebration of Africa Day this year, in the year in which we also mark a very important occasion, the centenaries of two very notable Africans, Utatu Nelson Mandela and Mama Albertina Sisulu. These are Africans who, at a different time in history, particularly the history of our continent, bequeathed to us values and behaviors that stand us in good stead in the 21st century. Both Tata Mandela and Mama Sisulu dedicated their lives to securing better social and economic conditions for all the people of our country and indeed of our continent as well. Just a few days ago, I was very honored to be near here in Amanzimtoti to interact with a global industrial company and a group of highly skilled and productive young South Africans in this province. They are both living proof of how our social and economic landscape is changing for the better. My visit to the South Coast took me to the Volvo truck factory, and I was accompanied by MEC Zikalala, where Volvo has firmly placed its confidence and its capital in South Africa as a vibrant, productive, and predictable investment destination. Sensitive to the need for us to promote manual work in the midst of the unstoppable march of automation, Volvo continues to invest in providing skills to its energetic team of assembly workers. Between them, these impressive young people turn the key on a new Volvo truck every 45 minutes, producing up to 10 a day, every day that they work. And they are now going to up it to 12 a day, thanks to the skills, sound working conditions, and motivation with which they have been empowered. These young workers have not only become self-sufficient individually themselves, but the material support they provide to their families means that purchasing power and personal pride and dignity are living side by side in neighborhoods around Amanzimtoti. I tell this story because it illustrates that the achievement of the African Union's Vision 2063 relies on seemingly isolated and desperate stories that are unfolding from Amanzimtoti to Abidjan, to Algiers, to Addis Ababa, to Kigali, to Nairobi, to Bujumbura, and many other places. Yet, instead of being isolated and desperate, these examples of great progress are in fact part of a rich tapestry of social and economic transformation that collectively produce a composite image of a continent on the rise. Whereas a few years ago, the magazine Economist saw fit to put on its cover a story of an Africa that is failing, which they dubbed the hopeless continent. A number of years later, those cover stories have changed, and they have said Africa is on the rise. It is therefore with a sense of hope and optimism that we find inspiration in the transformation that is sweeping across our continent in waves of varying intensity and size. These waves of development and transformation are constantly reshaping the shoreline of underdevelopment and disadvantage that used to characterize life on our continent. Hopelessness and despair are being eroded by the expansion of education and entrepreneurship on our continent and the advancing empowerment of women in African societies and communities. In March this year, the AU Summit in Kigali, Rwanda, reached the historic milestone of an agreement on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. This agreement seeks to dissolve barriers between countries to shared opportunity and prosperity by enabling the movement of people, goods, services, and knowledge around our continent. This agreement places the best that Africa has to offer at the disposal of all Africans and promises to reduce the inequality that has dogged our continent across national borders for a very long time. Poverty and underdevelopment often exists just a few kilometers away from prosperity and progress. The agreement on an African continental free trade area took place in a continent far removed from the Africa in which Pixley Kaisa Kaseme penned his 1906 essay titled The Regeneration of Africa. Seme called for the people in the land to unite and see the continent as equal in its contribution to civilization. His generation understood that the responsibility that rested on their shoulders to restore the dignity of the African people was quite immense. They challenged the Eurocentric stereotypes of Africa as a dark continent. It was our forebears, especially those who had early contacts with their diaspora counterparts studying overseas, who exchanged ideas of how to confront colonial oppression. In the interconnected world of today, where we as Africans are set ourselves as equals, not subjects, in the global governance system and the globalized economy, we are able to sustain the thinking and work pioneered by Pixley Kaisa-Kasem. Our current task is to shape the progressive and prosperous Africa we want and the one we wish to bequeath to future generations. This future must be the outcome of a shared vision in the same way that our dismantling of the shackles of oppression and colonialism relied on solidarity and unity in resistance. Therefore, in 2018, we continue to be guided and also to be inspired by Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Murtala Muhammad of Nigeria, Patrice Lumumba of Congo, Amilcar Cabral of Guinea-Bissau. We are also guided by Agostinho Neto of Angola, Eduardo Mondlane of Mozambique, Cyril Ramaphosa of Botswana, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Martin Luther King of the United States. Yes, Marcus Garvey of Jamaica, and our own Albert Luthuli and Nelson Mandela. They continue to be the spirits that guide us. We remain inspired by the words of Madiba when he said, "I dream of the realization of the unity of Africa, whereby its leaders combine in their efforts to solve the problems of this continent." The realization of Madiba's dream rests on leaders from all sectors of our society, leaders in government, business, labor, community, civil society, and large and across the continent. This dream that Madiba had, a dream of unity, was not only for Africa, but it was also for our own country. It was also a dream for our own very province here. If Madiba were alive today, he would say, "I dream of the realization of unity of our people here in KZN." He would have spoken very vocally and loudly and said some of the expressions of either disagreement that manifest themselves in the killing of other people that we disagree with must come to an end. Madiba would have said, unity should be underpinned by dialogue. Unity should be underpinned by consensus building. And that rather than resort to means where we kill each other, we should rather be sitting down and having discussions to build this unity that we also so need here in KZN. Madiba would have said, the killings of one another must come to an end. And so I say here today, the killings that have been taking place in this province must come to an end. It is indeed when we find a way of sitting down and discussing what makes us differ that we are able to find peace, that we are able to find a way in which we can develop our province and indeed our country. That is what was Madiba's dream. we are also guided by the central guiding vision crafted by our continent dubbed Agenda 2063, which is the AU vision of an integrated, prosperous and peaceful Africa, driven by its own citizens and representing a dynamic force in international arena. This is a strategic framework for the socio-economic transformation of the continent over the next 50 years. It builds on and seeks to accelerate the implementation of past and existing continental initiatives for the growth and sustainable development of our continent. In seeking to fulfill this vision, in our own instance as South Africa, we are taking steps to implement a number of policies that will make our own country be part of this development that is unfolding on our continent, so that by 2063, we are able to look back and say, yes, we played our part in developing our continent. And in our case, we want to look forward to 2030 and say, through our National Development Plan, we've been able to take important strides to develop our country. Right now, we are putting the building blocks in place, and in a number of places, the buildings are already going up. Having inherited a past that we are not proud of, we have had to embark and adopt policies that are going to rapidly advance the interests of our people. And one of those is to radically change the economic architecture of our country through our policy of radical economic transformation, which is aimed at transforming an economy that remains largely characterized by the structural flaws of a racist and patriarchal past. Our policy of radical economic transformation is also based on the imperative that as a country we should find ways of utilizing the resources of our country to full effect. This we have to do because the apartheid system designed the economy of our country, and indeed everything else in our country, in a way where the resources were just utilized to serve the interests of a minority. You come to the capital investment in our country, it was not fully exploited, it was utilized just to serve the interests of a minority. You come to human resources, the human resources of the majority of our people were blunted because they sought just to advance the resources of a small minority. You come to the most important resource in any country, land. Land also was utilized in a way as to advance the interests of a minority. Where do you find a situation where 87% of the land of a country is just set aside for less than even 10% of a population, and the majority is allocated 13%. This is what we have had to deal with, and this is what we have decided we are going to deal with, so that we utilize the full resources of our country to advance the interests of our people. That is why the question of land, therefore, has to be dealt with. We have to distribute land to our people through a process of expropriating that land and distributing it to the majority of our people. This is what we believe our forebears would have been pleased with. This is what we believe our forebears would have been proud of, to know that, yes, the resources of our country, of our continent, are being exploited to the hilt and are being used to advance the interests of all our people and not just a minority. As we noted in Parliament yesterday, millions of our people remain outside of the productive economic activity, and they are unable to contribute. They are also unable to benefit. This is so because they were locked out of the ability to contribute meaningfully. Like elsewhere on the continent, the majority of these people are young. They live far from the economic centers. They do not have the skills, work experience, or networks to find gainful employment. And they do not have the assets or the markets they need to start their own enterprises. This is the environment in which we look to collectives such as the KZN Growth Coalition, the Durban Chamber of Commerce, and the African Renaissance Trust to develop solutions and opportunities that will help us overcome the lingering poverty, unemployment, and inequality that face many people in this province and elsewhere. Working together with our provincial government, we should be able to tackle all these problems. We look to the collective leadership of this province to explore ways of giving effect to the new social compact around job creation that we are seeking to build among labor, business, and communities nationally. As leaders in this province, you are best placed to bring this effort to secure growth and development and transformation to the people of KwaZulu-Natal. As we build and move towards a national job summit, government, business, and labor and community in KwaZulu-Natal do have an opportunity to investigate how and where sustainable jobs and skills development can be implemented in this province. The experience of Volvo Trucks and its staff is a powerful example amongst many of what can be achieved and should be sustained as we set out on an ambitious drive to attract investment of $100 billion in our economy over the next 5 years. I was overjoyed when I met our mayor here, our Metro Mayor, my dear sister. And she said to me, President, I want to join your investment envoys and travel around the world and go campaign for quite a lot of this investment to come here to eThekwini. And I said, no, I want some of it to go to the rest of the province. And she said to me, but Mr. President, just cut me a little bit more so that it can come here to eThekwini. Then I realized that we've got a mayor who is looking forward and who is enthusiastic about generating investments for eThekwini. And as my comrade Sihle Zigalala will tell you, he wants quite a lot of that $100 billion that we are going to raise to come here to KwaZulu-Natal. Now, these are examples that we wish to see replicated, not just around eThekwini, not just around KZN, but throughout our country as well, and finally throughout the continent. Our own new dawn is part of a broader continental dawn of shared growth and prosperity, in which South Africa retains its position as a gateway to Pan-African opportunity for the peoples of this continent and our international partners. South Africa's own growth stands to benefit significantly from and contribute to the rising tide of development in our region and our continent. This rising tide entails political and economic cooperation with outcomes that include greater integration and the development of regional infrastructure, the development of services and knowledge bases that equitably benefit all member states in our continent. Investors and innovators must be made to feel at home here in Africa. They must be made to feel that this is a continent that they can come and safely invest their money in. We must be inspired by our ancestors, whose boundless creativity and majestic works endure till today. The magnificent pyramids of Egypt, the sculptures of ancient kingdoms of Ghana and Mali and Benin, the temples of Ethiopia, and the rock paintings of the Kalahari all speak volumes about Africa's innovation and contribution to human development. Increasingly, these representations of African civilization are being supplemented by advanced infrastructure, industrial parks, scientific laboratories, and corporate tower blocks that mark our continent's urban landscape. The engineers and artists of ancient times have worthy successors in a new generation of young scientists, technicians, financiers, coders, and designers. Our task is to create the conditions for this new generation to grow and to thrive and to build a continent of hope and progress. This hope and progress one sees emerging in many parts of our continent, testifying to this regeneration of Africa that was foreseen by Pixley Kaisakaseme. You go through many countries of our continent. In agriculture, you go to countries such as Ethiopia, countries that were dogged by famine a few years ago. They've now become centers of excellence when it comes to agriculture. Agricultural revolutions are emerging in a number of environments on the African continent. Technological prowess is just spreading throughout the continent. Our own leadership through the SKA that we have in the Karoo is testimony that indeed Africa, freed of the shackles of colonialism, freed of the shackles of apartheid misrule, can rise to the challenge. And indeed, in many ways, we are rising to the challenge. And Africa's time indeed has arrived. The key question is, have we arrived to take advantage of Africa's time? We must constantly remind all these wonderful scientists, all these wonderful workers on our continent. We need to constantly remind them of Madiba's words, who said, "Sometimes it falls upon a generation to be great. You can be that generation. Let your greatness blossom. It is then that the brighter day of which Pixley Isam Kaseme spoke that will rise upon the African continent. It is then that our chains will be dissolved, our plains will be red with harvest, and our crowded cities will send forth the hum of business. This is the Africa whose future is being seen, is being foretold also by our leaders. I want to conclude by saying, for me, as a new president, attending the African Union summits, it is actually quite a joy to see how African leaders across many countries have taken or are taking the development of our continent seriously. Whoever you talk to talks about the economic development, and not only of their own country, but of various countries in Africa. We've got a new generation of leaders on our continent who are focusing on how we can develop the people of our continent and how we can enhance the resources so that those resources can lead to economic development that will lead to the betterment of the lives of our people. Indeed, Africa is on the rise. The question is, are we going to be able to rise to the occasion and make sure that the African Renaissance that we have always spoken about indeed has dawned? Because Africa requires that all of us must put shoulder to wheel. We must commit ourselves to making this continent a successful continent. As we have always said, God bless Africa, Nkosi sikelele Africa, as it goes on its path of development and rising as a great continent. I thank you.
Halala, Africa, halala. Halala, Africa, halala. Thank you very much to our two first citizens of the province and of the country for sharing the overview of where we are at the moment and also the future of our country and our province. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank the President for spending these few moments with us and wish him well as he is just about to leave to go to Cape Town. And I will request that we all stand up and give him an opportunity to take leave of absence. A farewell applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. May we be seated. We are now going to proceed with the sub-session of this session. I will now invite our Deputy Mayor of eThekwini to welcome us to Durban. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you, Program Director. Good morning to all of you. The Chair of African Renaissance Organization, Dr. Sibusiso Ndebele. Well, our President has just left now, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. Also, Mr. Willis Mkunu, Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, and Mr. Sihle Sikalala, MEC for Economic Development, Tourism, and Environmental Affairs. And I also noticed the MEC Ravi Pillay of Human Settlement is also here. And also Your Excellencies, Ambassadors and Consul Generals of various embassies that are present here as well. The Presidents of Durban Chamber and also Minara is present here. Captains of industry and leading businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, and all protocols observed. On behalf of the African Renaissance Organization and the city of eThekwini in particular, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the 20th edition of the African Renaissance Festival. The African Renaissance Festival is held in May as part of Africa Day celebrations, which is observed on May 25th annually. And in doing so, we not only celebrate a continent renaissance, but this is also for us as a country, as a province and a city, a time to revive the rudiments of our democracy and for the introspection and affirmation of our commitment to better the lives of all our citizens. With this being the purpose, the theme of this year's conference is Inclusive Social-Economic Transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, the African Renaissance Conference is a special platform that provides a worthwhile opportunity to exchange ideas, views, and contextualize pertinent issues affecting KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa's and Africa's development and progress. We were honored to have our President of South Africa, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, with us. And it's written here that I have to wish him, I have to warmly welcome him, so in his absence. So in this State of Nation address, in his State of Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa passionately called on all of us to work towards an inclusive economic growth agenda that also creates jobs and is also sustainable. In this regard, we are happy at eThekwini that this clarion call came at a time when we had already adopted a program of catalytic projects which will not only change the landscape of the city in the next future, but it also provides an appropriate conduit for inclusive social economic transformation. Now, social economic transformation is at the top of the eThekwini's agenda, which goes hand in hand with the city's catalytic development projects. Inclusive social economic transformation at eThekwini is guided by the city's radical economic transformation framework, which is in line with the National Development Plan and also the government's 9-point plan. Now, the eThekwini's RET framework for inclusive social transformation focuses on the city's projects such as the energy, tourism, agriculture, boosting the SMMEs, science and technology, industrialization, transport, and others. We are working on a number of large-scale projects that have the potential to make a regional impact. To this effect, we have committed ourselves to ensure that we will provide substantial support to Black emerging businesses. Some of the cutting-edge investments that we have undertaken in this regard include the 200 million investment towards a cruise terminal in the Durban harbour. The project is expected to complement the Durban Point waterfront developments, which will extend the beachfront promenade from Ushaka Beach towards the entrance of the harbour. We estimate for the investment for the Durban Point waterfront project to be over the next 10 to 15 years to be around 30 billion to 35 billion. We also anticipate that this project alone will generate an economic activity that will yield more than 11,000 construction jobs and 6,750 permanent jobs upon completion, and also a host of digital instrumentation in a phased approach in the eThekwini area. The progress of spreading smart technology in Africa begins with local governments. It is local governments that address and leverage on connectivity in a digital economy. So the network infrastructure generated by the municipalities brings diffusion of communication possibilities, thereby creating opportunities for unique businesses to flourish. So there are a variety of projects linking tourism, environmental cleanups, and alien eradication, recycling, and also job creation. These are various. Also, there are various other broader programs. So, Program Director, this edition of the African Renaissance Conference, as with the previous conferences, is privileged to have high-level delegates from various levels in government, ambassadors and consul generals from respective countries, captains and leading business representatives. So in plenaries and sessions to follow over the next 2 days, speakers and delegates will have the opportunities through specialized topics to make the contribution aimed at goals and objectives of this conference. So this conference must be more than just formal events at which we read out speeches. Rather, we must take the opportunity it offers to draw a roadmap as a collective to achieve these objectives. In this centenary year, you know that Nelson Mandela and Mama Albertina Sisulu it's the celebration of Nelson Mandela and Mama Albertina Sisulu. So I wish to warmly welcome you once again to this milestone of 20th African Renaissance Conference. May the strong foundations laid by both of these, of both Madiba and Mas Sisulu empower our generation to press on to make a society a better place to live in. And may your deliberations over the next 2 days raise Africa to the newest heights. Thank you very much.
sorry to interrupt. Can we have the 4 business representatives to go to room 24, Mr. Makunga and the Butulezi, room 24 now, as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Feza Pierre, for quite a warm, welcoming speech. Can we give her another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen? On the stage, we've just joined by Dr. Martin Davis, Deloitte Africa, who will speak immediately after our MEC, Sihle Zigalala. Sihle Zigalala is the current provincial chairperson of the ANC and the MEC for Economic Development, Tourism and Environmental Affairs in KZN. He is a man of formidable courage and resilience, accredited as an accomplished organizer with a great sense of respect and humility. He will address us on the topic leading with integrity towards growing an inclusive economy for integrated, targeted, and effective service delivery. Let's welcome MEC Sihle Zigalala on the podium.
Thanks, Program Director. The Program Director, Professor Shau Ngubane, in his absentia, President of our Republic, His Excellency President Ramaphosa, the Chairperson of the African Renaissance Chapter in KwaZulu-Natal, Dr. Sbu Ndebele, the Premier of our province, Honorable Willis Mchunu, MECs who are with us, MEC Ravi Pillay, Comrade Mike Mabuya Kulu, who is the provincial convener of the ANC. And I must clarify that I'm not the chairperson of the ANC, I'm the former. I'm the coordinator of the task team of the ANC. Members of diplomatic corps, the captains of industry, the co-chair of the KZN Growth Coalition, Mr. Tembe, CEOs of various public entities that are with us, and in saying so, I would want to acknowledge also those that are national, including Transnet. Ladies and gentlemen, senior government officials that are with us here, we take a great pleasure to be part of this occasion. As Africans, we have converged to engage on strategies that would help to accelerate the rebirth of our continent. All of us gathered here today and the millions elsewhere in our continent and the diaspora are correctly seized with the question of how we can transform our continent from being a basket case continent into one that is a bread basket of the world. But before we engage on key issues pertinent to the subject we have been tasked to engage on, let us start by acknowledging the role played by the ruling party, the African National Congress, in its consistency in articulating the point that ours has never been the struggle for a single country, but one that is the internationalist in its character and outlook. In the case of this summit, we want to recognize the stellar work done by former president of our country, former President Thabo Mbeki, in championing and popularizing the concept of African Renaissance. And that was taken and cascaded down to our province by none other than the Premier of that time, Dr. Sibusiso Ndebele. Today, when we speak of African Renaissance, we no longer shoulder the burden of explaining what we mean, but rather we must meet to discuss the efficacy of strategies and programs of rebuilding our continent. Indeed, this work and the efforts of former President Mbeki was taken further by former President Jacob Zuma, and today it is spearheaded by President Cyril Ramaphosa, and his articulation early this morning has proven the vision we have as the African National Congress and the country in advancing the African agenda. Program Director, various forecasting studies, including the Mackenzie's Leon on the Move report, projects that Africa's collective GDP in 2020 is set to reach 2.6 trillion US dollars. And Africa's consumer spending in the same year of 2020 will reach 1.4 trillion US dollars. The report had further stated that the number of Africans who will be at the working age in 2040 will be plus 1.1 billion, while the number of Africans living in cities by 2030 will reach 50% of the entire citizens of the continent. Now that talks to urbanization, but also it talks to the potential economic growth that stands for Africa. Therefore, ours here today seem to be the challenge of how we respond to a question of the dormant potential economic growth that is seldom realized. We should be able to engage on strategies to transform our economy, our continent's economy, and ensure that we bring about physical manifestation of that potential growth. Today, we want to argue that at the center of the response to this problem statement is the necessary discussion about the kind of leadership that is needed to drive the economic transformation in the continent. And in line with the topic we have been given, which is leading with integrity toward an inclusive economy for integrated, targeted, and effective service delivery, we agree that the lack of integrity in leadership has been at the center of both underdevelopment and inequitable economic distribution, both in the continent and elsewhere in the world. And we want to be specific that the problem we're talking about of the lack of credible leadership is engulfing Africa, but is not only confined to Africa, it's affecting the world. To be specific, in our own case as South Africa, the failed apartheid experiment is the best and the most immediate point of reference in this regard. That black Africans swell the ranks of the poor and the unemployed as compared to white compatriots is the direct legacy of apartheid misrule, and which talks to the failed leadership, which failed to recognize the fact that all of us are South Africans and Africans and should enjoy equal rights. Those who led us during apartheid era defined which was defined as a crime against humanity, did not lead with integrity. As such, the majority of our population was relegated to the periphery of the economy's mainstream. However, the lack of integrity in the leadership is also envisaged in the incident. It's also evidenced in the incidents of corruption, fraud, and maladministration perpetrated by those entrusted with leadership positions. And in this regard, lack of integrity did not only start in 1994, but it started in 1948. For me, it was lack of integrity in providing leadership when the government of that day introduced apartheid system. The corruption, fraud, and maladministration we're seeing from 1994 onward also represent, to a certain extent, the lack of integrity in providing leadership. And therefore, it should be characterized as such. As Africans, we should indeed be worried when bribery becomes the norm rather than an anomaly. Those of us who are in the tourism industry, for instance, are very concerned that traveling in some parts of Africa, especially by car, has become one of the exercises where it becomes easy to be subjected to exhaustion exercise, where those who are entrusted with maintaining the law terrorize tourists by demanding bribes. When you cross into other countries, driving on your car, you get told that you should pay a bribe for nothing, just for being there. And this is one of the things that affect tourism in our continent, and we need to address. At the high end of this corruption are the illicit financial flow, particularly from developing countries to the developed world. A report of the high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa described this source as, and I quote, illicit flow is described as the money that is illegally earned, transferred, or utilized. These funds typically originate from three sources: commercial tax evasion, trade misinvoicing and abuse, transfer pricing, criminal activities including drug trade, human trafficking, illegal arms dealings, and smuggling of contrabands, close quote. At the back of these illicit financial flows are teams of lawyers, accountants, tax experts, and many other players who make it possible for this practice to prosper. The tragedy is that these illicit flows rob the countries of their origins of funds necessary to development of their communities. As a result, those communities are left in poverty and experiencing unemployment. I'm raising this to underline the question that the challenge of lack of leadership integrity affects both government and the private sector and should be confronted as such. While the high-level panel report estimates that over the last 50 years, our continent has lost over 1 trillion in financial flows, what is the most worrisome is that we are currently estimated to be losing more than 50 billion US dollars annually in the illicit financial flows. Therefore, lack of leadership or of integrity in leadership as it pertains to issues of good governance is equally driven by both the private and the public sectors. Integrity in leadership will be restored by both the public and the private sector by desisting from pointing fingers at each other, but collaborate and work together to root these practices, including fraud, corruption, maladministration, and illicit flow. Importantly, we believe that the source countries of the illicit flows into Africa and from Africa to other countries, and this leaves, especially if the study is to be considered, it presents a phenomenon where poor countries are left in poverty and finances being channeled into developed countries. The overriding principle, however, is that the challenges afflicting Africa and the solutions to her problems are dependent on us working together, the private sector as well as the public sector. When it comes to issues of inclusive economy is closely intertwined with inclusive economic growth. And from where we stand, there shall be no inclusive economy without inclusive economic growth. Scholars defined inclusive economic growth as a concept which advances equitable economic opportunities for all and where economic benefits are accrued to all. The Rockefeller Foundation defines inclusive economies by 5 interrelated characteristics, and these are economic participation, equity, growth, sustainability, and stability. While all of these characteristics, including participation, are a prerequisite for achieving an inclusive economy, for the purposes of our engagement this morning, we want to emphasize on the economic growth as a main pillar of building an inclusive economy. By economic growth, within the context of and as a prerequisite for an inclusive growth, the foundation posits, and I quote, "An economy is increasingly producing enough goods and services to enable broad gains in well-being and greater opportunity. Goods, jobs, and opportunities are growing, and income are increasing, especially for the poor. Economic systems are transforming for the betterment of all, including and especially poor and excluded economies. Economic growth and transformation is not only captured by aggregated measures of economic output, but must include and be measured by other outcomes that capture overall well-being," close quote. In this regard, this definition of economic growth resonates correctly with radical economic transformation. And radical economic transformation in our country remains one of the critical pillars of transforming the economy for ensuring that we attain an inclusive economy. It is critical that it becomes the means of a travel toward the attainment of inclusive economy. So radical economic transformation talks to deliberate structural alterations of the economy for the attainment of all sectors, irrespective of gender, racial divide, but all sectors in the country for the attainment of an inclusive economic growth. It is one of the key characteristics toward inclusive growth. I've taken a point that I should emphasize and clarify this point because we seem to differ on the understanding of radical economic transformation. Radical economic transformation should not be a reversal of segregation policies, but equally it is also not any means to ensure looting or corruption. Radical economic transformation must be implemented within the policy framework that guides us in the private and the public sector. It should ensure that it creates jobs, create and address poverty in the country. And therefore, radical economic transformation is a means to the end, and the means which is a tool, but the end is the inclusive economy. Therefore, the two do not contradict each other. In South Africa, 24 years into democracy, the legacy of apartheid still looms large. After the struggle for liberation in our country, the African continent, including South Africa, must today wage a struggle for economic liberation and economic emancipation of all citizens. This would work toward the attainment of an inclusive economy. The 2018 Africa Economic Outlook report confirms that Africa, like the rest of the world economies, is one of those that are standing to grow during this era. It is projected that the real output of growth will increase to 4.1 in 2018 and 19, up from 2.2% in 2016. This is Africa, and it is the totality of growth expected from Africa. And I want to pause here and underline the question that the greater part of that growth is projected and is coming from the other parts of Africa rather than the SADC. Ethiopia, I think, is one of those countries that are doing quite well. Nigeria is still there. Ours is only it differs because we are a most industrialized economies in Africa. But in terms of economic growth, we are not performing at an envisaged level. And this is the focus that should preoccupy, it's a focal area that should preoccupy all of us as to how are we going to ensure and attain inclusive economic growth. And this must concern all of us, both in the private sector as well as in the public sector. Thus, we have to work hard in ensuring that we get more of the foreign direct investment into our continent, but more into the SADC region and into South Africa. The report also continues to caution and counsel us that African countries should strengthen their economic resilience and dynamism to lift their economies to a new growth equilibrium driven by innovation and productivity. Now, this poses a question: innovation and productivity. We're told that children who go to school today are studying for careers that will be not in existence when they complete their studies. So, some of the children who go to school today are studying for careers that will be not there in 15 years to come. Now, you will not believe this. 15 years ago, to be a tailor in the bank was quite a good job. Today, you get retrenched because nobody needs to go to the tailor and get services. We do everything electronic, and there is no need of going to the bank. We're told, and the research is pointing to a direction that if we don't embrace innovation and the productivity, we are going to continue to be left behind. Now, the president spoke about the Africa Continent Free Trade Area, which is an agreement signed and endorsed by the African Union Extraordinary Summit that took place in March this year. This agreement will boost intra-Africa trade and create a bigger market, which is estimated that it's a market of about 1 billion people, and it stands at $2.6 trillion US. Now, we need to ensure that we respond to the potentials that are created by this agreement. We need, as KwaZulu-Natal, to ensure that we complement by ensuring cooperation with other countries on industrial and infrastructure development that are a key component for the development and integration approach. KwaZulu-Natal exports to Africa about the goods that are at a value of 37 billion in 2016, and the imports we received stands at about 5 billion. Now, that tells you that we have not sufficiently tapped into this market. We need to respond to this task of ensuring that we move to Africa and promote intra-Africa trade. In this regard, we have tasked the KwaZulu-Natal the Trade and Investment KwaZulu-Natal to develop a provincial strategy on how we should engage with the latest development and this potential arising from this agreement. We've also tasked the Trade and Investment KwaZulu-Natal to work closely with the 4-person team that was established by the president to work on attracting investment into the country. The significance of exports in the economic growth is highlighted by large contributions of exports to GDPs in many countries. One can cite an example of China and Germany. China's exports to GDP ratio is about 39.9%. On the other hand, Germany's export ratio accounts for about 50%. And when you bring that to South Africa, it only accounts for 25%. And in KwaZulu-Natal, exports only account for 18% of the GDP of our province. And that talks that we are not strong in doing business that help to ensure that we export to other countries. And that is why we've said part of the strategy that Trade and Investment KwaZulu-Natal must develop should include exposing businesses from KwaZulu-Natal into the available market in African continent. We know that because of instability, there is reluctance to go to Africa. But there are stable countries in Africa with sound democratic institutions. And therefore, let us not be confined. The problem with us as the business operators in KwaZulu-Natal is that one, we sleep at 6. Unlike others, if you go to Johannesburg, you will find that Centenary will be fully operational at 10 o'clock midnight. People will still be engaging in meetings, but that time KwaZulu-Natal will be sleeping. Secondly, those who are in business in KwaZulu-Natal, especially small entrepreneurs, are confined by borders. We even know that there is Mpumalanga, there is Eastern Cape. So we don't spread to the whole of South Africa, let alone the continent. We know that we must do business here. We must begin to reach out to the continent. Therefore, regional integration will remain important. We're also emphasizing on the development of regional corridors, like linking our neighboring countries, such as Mozambique, Swaziland, and Lesotho. We're not going to develop on our own without these neighboring countries. Number of challenges that are causing disruptions in our own province are as a result of lack of economic growth in our neighboring countries. If you talk about challenges we face in the clothing and textile industry, it is partly because of what is happening in areas of your Newcastle and Ladysmith, where you will have cheap labor coming from Lesotho to work in those areas. As a result, there will be social and number of tensions in those areas. In that, we need to ensure that we develop the border development plans aim at advancing regional integration. And it was because of that that the Premier led a delegation to Mozambique to cement our relationship as the province with the province of Maputo. In 2017, we also set up a one-stop shop investment center here in Durban to ensure that we make it easy for investors to invest in the province. That one-stop shop also was complemented with the establishment of the 2 satellite stations that are in Durban Trade Port and the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone. Already these 2 SEZs are becoming a magnet for international investment aimed at growing export into the regional market. We can say this as tomorrow we'll be unveiling one of the major investment, that these 2 special economic zones are becoming very, very attractive, but they are attractive to foreign direct investors. Yet, very less is done by us here. We know that we have a potential to grow the investment, and therefore we'd like to call on all of us, on all of those, especially big conglomerates, to continue ensuring that they expand investment. We're happy and we want to applaud the investment that is being done by a number of companies in KwaZulu-Natal. Whirlpool will want to applaud the work they are doing in expansion of their operations in the province. Richards Bay Minerals, we want also to applaud the work they are doing. We also want to applaud the work that is done by various companies in the automotive sector, as well as those that are in companies that are involved in property development. Deputy Mayor, I would want to, because the program director here is coming from the world of the academia, and in the world of the academia, plagiarism is not allowed. And therefore, the 200 million investment that we have launched in KwaZulu-Natal is coming from Transnet. And I think we must applaud the Transnet team that is here with us, Ms. Kalinge, and all senior managers for that cruise terminal, which we are guaranteed that it will start operating not later than 2022. Now, that is a great investment into the economy of this province. Ladies and gentlemen, there are key and specific areas that we believe we should partner on. We believe that we need to create a conducive environment for investors in the province. In doing that, we need to promote stability and deal with disruptions that have affected a number of business operations. We want to thank the work that is being done by various organizations, especially the Chamber, the Durban Chamber of Commerce, the work that they are doing, and will continue as government to support that work to ensure that all business operations are supported and defended from those who goes around disrupting business operations. In that regard, I must say that we have also engaged with these formations, and by July this year, we are going to have a radical economic transformation summit where we are going to develop a comprehensive approach on the implementation of the RET strategy. But we are not going to allow disruptions to continue affecting business operations in the province. The second area, we want to continue working together on industrialization in the province. We'll do this through working to support the work of our special economic zones, revamping our industrial clusters such as KwaSithebe, Howick, Ladysmith, and Newcastle. We also want to ensure that we work together with the private sector in advancing sustainable radical economic transformation through the implementation of the Black Industrialist Program, Operation Vula, which focuses on supporting small enterprises in the province. Lastly, we would like to work together with the diplomatic corps to strengthen trade relations and partnership for the growth of the economy of the province, our country, and our respective countries in the globe. And therefore, it will be remiss of me if I end my remarks without expressing our greatest appreciation for a number of investments that have been launched by various companies, which augurs well for business confidence in the country. Let us work together to ensure stability and boost business confidence, which will therefore help us to attain the inclusive economic growth we are debating today. With that, Program Director, I thank you.
Thank you very much to the MEC, Baba Okuzeni, for such an informative presentation. I think he also highlighted the key specific areas that I believe most of us has taken note of them. And what I liked the most was that we are victims of these challenges that tends our economic growth. But ladies and gentlemen, we are behind time as we speak, but I will request that you kindly bear with us in juggling around with our program. Thank you very much, Bob Zigala. Can we give Kuzen another round of applause? You may be aware that I left out the genesis of African Renaissance by Dr. Sbusiso Ndebele, who is the chair of the African Renaissance. I will now invite him to address us. He is a man who does not need introduction, but he has been in leading positions, Premier of KwaZulu-Natal. Before that, he was the Minister, MEC for Transport, and then he became the Minister of Transport, National Department, and also the Minister of Correctional Services, and an ambassador to Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. Ndebele to give us the genesis of the African Renaissance.
Thank you very much, Professor Ngubane. And I think all of us have been listening for quite some time now. We thank you again for your patronage of the African Renaissance. Christians usually say Jesus is the answer. And then you ask, what is the question? We also say the African Renaissance is the answer. What is the question? For us in KwaZulu-Natal, as the rest of the country was beginning to consolidate freedom that dawned in 1994, in KwaZulu-Natal, we were not able to enjoy that freedom, that sense of arriving, that sense of saying, this is what we have been fighting for, let's continue now. Instead, KwaZulu-Natal was beset with violence, conflict between African and African, conflict between African and Indian, conflict between African and white, conflict between African and colored. It was out of that question that was looking us starkly in the eye that we said, this one does not, we don't have apartheid controlling and governing us. We have a democratic government, but we are not going to be asking Dr. Nelson Mandela and the new democratic government to come and solve problems that emanated internally and intrinsically within ourselves. Indeed, the very first speech that Dr. Nelson Mandela made here, I think it was the 25th of February, the first public address, big rally that he addressed was here in outside King's Park here in Durban. And he started his speech by saying, throw your weapons, your pangas, guns, assegais, throw them into the sea. Now, he didn't say we must bury the hatchet. He said we must throw those weapons into the sea. Why didn't he say we must bury the hatchet? He said, he didn't say we must bury the hatchet precisely because if you bury your panga and your asaka and your gun, you can always go and dig it up again. But if you throw it into the sea, it's gone. So he said this. And today, that question is still relevant because we haven't actually done that. We still talk about so many killings in our province, so much bloodletting in our province. And it is that becomes the foundation for human development, for a family to develop in peace. If a family says, we'll meet for supper, it must be able to meet for supper without guns roaring around, without the son missing because he is hiding somewhere. And for that family, for that community, for that school, for that religious center to be able to develop, This is then the question. And we are saying, as the African Renaissance, a challenge is in front of us. What the MEC, Mr. Sihle was saying here, these are grand, important plans and important programs that are already on the ground. But if you have got such important and exciting programs on the ground, you are not going to be able to take advantage of those opportunities if we are beset by conflict. President spoke about the opening of an economic zone, not only in SADC, but in the whole of Africa. But that opportunity of an opening of an economic zone, you then say, what is the easiest entry point for me? Oh, if I went to Mercedes or MAN or Volvo and said, look, I need to buy a truck. In fact, Volvo will agree, even if I don't have a deposit. If I've got a plan, I've got a clear program that I'm going to be carrying goods from Durban port to Zimbabwe, to Zambia. The trucks are all on the road all the time. So you've got a market, you've got a business that is clear with a business plan, and that's it. And therefore you come out with a Volvo truck. But if that truck is going to be stuck in Moy River, how are you going to pay? If there is no peace even on our freeways, how are you going to pay? And therefore the creation of peace becomes a prerequisite for an African Renaissance, for a developmental takeoff for any community. As long as we are turning against each other and not turning to each other, so much our underdevelopment will remain. And therefore, the challenge for us today, without going into a lot of other things, when we started the first program, the first Renaissance that Nelson Mandela addressed was beyond conflict. Because we seriously saw ourselves as having gone beyond conflict, having gone through all these conflicts, but we then said, now is the time to move forward. And the following year continued, and we were talking about the crucial issue of fighting underdevelopment and poverty, and we were really moving. We talked about our magazine here, Ibuya, and that is our program in 2003, saying our time has come. And it needed that time to be grabbed by both hands. 2004, we're looking at the first state that had people of African origin, Haiti, that became free way back in 1887. And they were saying, here we are 100 years after. And we're looking at all those things. Peace and security was looked at in 2007, where we were wanting to create partnership now based on a peaceful province and a peaceful country that now needed to harness the productive resources to move forward. We were the ones who hosted the World Cup in 2010 here. It was very interesting when the rest of the world ascended into South Africa. People had this idea of Africa where you meet elephants on the road and roaring lions and all these things. And suddenly they land in OR Tambo Airport. Okay, the airport, of course, must be the same international standard, it's fine. Move outside the airport. Oh, are we still in the airport? No. We're now in Johannesburg. Wow. Is this made just constructed just for the World Cup? No. It's one of a city that has finished more than 200 years now. Wow. And then they saw KwaZulu-Natal, Durban, and saw our freeways, that the freeway that you see in KwaZulu-Natal will be the same freeway that you see in New York, you see in Atlanta. Wow. That's it. And it put us on the map throughout that 2010. And therefore we have traveled all this way. We can't go back now. 2013, we're talking about connecting Africa using the connectivity that is there. It is in this context when we say the price of development. If you are a successful brother or sister, you'll attract your siblings to come to you for assistance to get a registration fee at university. That is the nature of the thing. If you are a developed country, you are Lusaka, you then attract everybody else in the outskirts of Zambia to come to Lusaka. If you are Johannesburg, if you are Durban, if you are Cape Town, you attract everybody else. If you are New York, there's a time when you can no longer really say it's purely American. It's a melting pot of the whole world, that New York. If you want to meet a Polish person, a Chinese, Indian, Russian, and so forth, you'll meet them in New York. It's a melting pot of the world. No wonder it's the center of the United Nations. And that's what is the price of development. We ourselves, therefore, cannot develop and think we are going to be an island. That development still depends on our interconnectedness. Where then would a place for xenophobia fit in there? Xenophobia is backward, is anti-development, is anti-progress, and it fights against a tide that you can't stop. You can't stop the whole people going to Jerusalem. Everybody is there, is a center at that, talking about biblical Jerusalem. Everybody is there because that's where development is. Once you are developing, you attract everybody else because people need to contribute to the development and benefit out of that development. The challenge for us is how do we make that inclusivity, that inclusive growth that is our theme today. Not in hoping that you are going to have the University of KwaZulu-Natal having just lecturers from KwaZulu-Natal. It then can't be a university. You are not going to have some island somewhere that becomes an exclusive arena of these people. Obviously, it will predominate. If you are in Calcutta, the Indian people will dominate. If you are in Africa, the African people will dominate in terms of just numbers. That's the nature of it. But it can't be exclusive. And therefore, the African Renaissance must put this challenge that says inclusive growth. That growth that we saw as we were moving towards freedom. We turn to each other for support, for solidarity. We must continue with that solidarity even now. And therefore, the challenge for us is to take this African Renaissance and ensure that not only do we end up here in Durban at the ICC, we are sure that at Mhlatuza, in the South Coast, in Newcastle, all over, we start having offshoots of the African Renaissance to ensure that our young people start having platforms where they can express their ideas through forums, whether these are debating structures from that and workers and women and all those people, having a forum where we say, how do we translate the development that is upon us to be able to make a difference in our own lives? We say, therefore, the African Renaissance ensures that development attracts, underdevelopment we know repels. The development therefore must start having a meaning to our lives and ensure that that development we are able to touch and say, where is economic development here? And it must be translated into development of families and of communities. And people say, yes, were it not for this development, I wouldn't be here. And be able to appreciate the route that we have traveled and say, we have traveled this route, will be celebrating our 21st next year. And that should be able to concretely say, in this region of ours, this is how we've translated it in terms of empowerment, in terms of educational opportunities, and in terms of acquiring that education and translating it to concrete development. And therefore, the development will be seen not only in terms of your own locality, but in terms of Africa as a whole. These words, we say, let us discuss and put concretely plans to make African Renaissance a real meaningful to all of us. Thank you very much.
This was the journey of our pilgrimage. We started in 1999 to date, and we are still standing. And thank you very much for your leadership, Manzala Nkosi. Can we give him a big round of applause? We still have our final speaker in this opening session, Dr. Martin Davis, who's a partner and a managing director of emerging markets in Africa at Deloitte, and is a member of the Global Firms Insight Advisory Group as well as the Deloitte Economics team. He has been trusted advisors to the executive at a large array of multinational firms and was previously ranked #1. He has been selected as Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. He's a member of the prestigious Young Presidents Organization and is currently a visiting professor at the IE Business School, Madrid, Spain, and a non-executive director of the NEPAD Business Foundation. Today, he will be tackling the topic critical success factors in restoring national and international investment confidence. Can we give Dr. Davis a round of applause?
Good morning, everyone. It still is. You're clapping way too prematurely, but thank you nevertheless. I've been asked to address a rather sizable topic here, and I'm going to digress if you don't mind. We haven't got too much time, and thank you for staying, much appreciated. I don't want to burden you further, but just some thoughts, if I may, and I want to tell you a brief story, and I want to link it to where we are in South Africa. Anyone a fan here of Donald Trump? Hands up, please. I thought so. One. Okay, you have a second one. Let me tell you, the guy in the blue shirt, if anyone's interested. Let me tell you about the first Donald Trump supporter I met. Not too long ago, I arrived in New York City. If you go to JFK Airport, it's your typical sort of really bad third world infrastructure in the US. And I was getting a driver from JFK to Midtown. It's about an hour. I get chatting to the driver, kill some time, nice guy. He lived in Connecticut, he had four kids, all boys, and he was a Donald Trump supporter. So I found this very interesting. In the conversation, he says to me, Martin, where are you from? And I said to him, I'm from South Africa. And I can see it in the rearview mirror. He had this puzzled look on his face. And he says to me, he says, you're from South Africa? I said, yeah. And he said, but you're white. And I'm like, yeah, there's a few of us down there. And what he said next is absolutely classic. he says, so the majority, are they like African Americans? I was like, yeah, so you guys all African Americans. Okay. Now, this is sort of a silly story, but let me tell you why it's important. Okay. And just digress for a second. I'm not beholden to slides, but we can look at them if you want. Most of it's pretty boring data. But as South Africa, I'll get back to Donald Trump in a second, we had, past tense, a very long, hard-won, hard-built reputation, geopolitically, geoeconomically, and regionally in our continent. That's past tense. Our reputation in recent years has been eroded geopolitically and has been lost. The challenge, which I think the President was talking to earlier, the MEC alluded to, and others, is that we ultimately have to regain our reputation. I see it in multilateral meetings, at business. I see it in boardrooms. I see it in government meetings. We need to be respected once again, and that will not come easily. This, I think, is the not-so-esoteric challenge that we face. Now, more back to Donald Trump and why I think it's important. Donald Trump may be pro-business, but he ain't pro-nation. What I mean by this, and this is sort of my conclusion, guys, newsflash, we will never be internationally competitive if we are so internally divided. There's a phrase we used to have in South Africa. It's called Rainbow Nation. Remember that? I don't hear it from politicians these days anymore. There's sadly no evidence that the Rainbow Nation is a winning political strategy. And I think that is, for me personally, is quite depressing. We live in an age, as mentioned, of identity politics. Personally, I blame Twitter, but I'm afraid we need to move above and beyond the intellectually populist, superficial, and think more deeper about how we craft nations. Because my experience globally when I travel, like most of us do, is you talk to me about a failed nation, I'll talk to you about a failed state. And that's something we as South Africa, I'm afraid, have to get right going forward. So, this is just some boring data aside, and I'll get to the point now, is that this is World Economic Forum's rankings. There's some good performing, there's some bad performing. But again, going back to Warren Buffett, the sage of Omaha, the long-term investor, the long-term thinker, is that our credibility, the trust that people outside this country, not to mention ourselves, of course, have in our own institutions and own capabilities, has been eroded in recent times. And of course, is this a laser pointer? Of course, the dramatic collapse. I mean, I was very proud to say, and this is prior to my Deloitte days, very proud to say that South Africa was ranked until recently the #1 in the world for global auditing standards. How that has changed. How that has changed in the last year or so, we know why. We have to move up our rankings once again. In many indicators, we were not so much globally competitive as we were globally leaders. We can do it, we got to get back there. Sometimes countries make historic mistakes. Unfortunately, at country level, these mistakes take a very long time to correct. Unlike companies, which are quite agile, i.e. disciplined by market forces and shareholder pressures, countries, I'm afraid, often take very long times to correct. And the bad news for all of us in the room, these corrections can take generations. This is not good for your careers, it's not good for your net worth, and more importantly, it isn't good for the next generation. Let me give you a couple of examples, and this is through total serendipity, largely luck. I found myself in a couple of key places at key moments in time. This is all sort of my personal journey, if you will. In 1989, many young people in the room here may not remember this, but 1989, collapse of the Berlin Wall. October 89. A month later, I was there. I was traveling around Europe on a train with my brother, and we ended up in Berlin. And this was happening. It was crazy. Point being here, what happened in Eastern Europe, or East Berlin, soon to become East-West Germany, became one. Soviet bloc, Eastern Europe, suddenly became emerging Europe, became the EU, 28 member countries, soon to be 27 and a half. That's a joke. But what we saw is this political shock resulted in private capital being unleashed and development taking place. A political shock, structure reform. China, 1992. Deng Xiaoping went on, paramount leader of China at the time, from China, yeah? Deng Xiaoping went to Shenzhen on his southern tour, endorsing the reforms of that were being pushed through by, should we say, pro-market forces in China against the conservative ideologues. That was Shanghai. I was there in 1990, thereabouts, and it looked exactly like that. That was sort of pretty open land. I remember walking, there was a fairground on the other side of a river. That's the old Huangpu River. The Huangpu, the sort of, on this side was the Bund, buildings built by the Europeans. And today you won't recognize it looks like that. That's what's called structure reform on steroids, Chinese style. This was a country that for decades made a historical mistake. It was called communism, socialism, centrally planned economies. That's what happened. It took from 1949 to 1978, December 78, 3 decades before the mistake was started to be rectified. 30 years. Then we see this. I lived in Korea for a few years. I was there for 2 odd years studying at Yonsei University, and we had the Asian financial crisis in 1997. If you look at Asia today, the embedded wealth, middle-class driven societies, super progressive economies, and the center of global growth clearly has shifted toward Asia. If you haven't been to Asia, China, Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, these places, I strongly encourage you to go. It'll be an exercise in what is possible with a compound annual growth rate typically of 7, 8, 9% a year. Point here is financial shock, which decimated economies from Indonesia in the south up to Korea in the north. Structural reform as a result, long-term economic growth trajectory. Nigeria, 2014. I was in Abuja for a while up there, and we saw the commodity shock. Oil at the time was 120, 125 bucks a barrel, mid-2014, thereabouts. And Nigeria, structure reform? Question mark. Guys, where I'm going with this, all these geographic, economic, historical examples have a point, and it's this. There seemingly must be a shock before true structural reform takes place by states. The question is to us as South Africans, has this shock taken place yet? If you're from Zimbabwe, it has happened. Believe me, you know it. That's why you don't live there anymore. In South Africa's case, is this sufficient a shock? I think Pravin Gordhan gets it, undoubtedly. Do we realize it? That's a very rhetorical question. And we're only going to realize it if we can fully understand, comprehend the need for structural reform. Structural is a synonym for sensible. We talk about radical. That word was used a lot this morning. I'm not quite sure what it means. It does not mean doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for different results. The structural reform thing is a very, I think, my observations, is an imperative to where we want to head. So how do we rank? I'll fly through this. Just newsflash, guys. The global average rank now, or global average growth rate this year, forecast, emerging markets, that's hopefully us, is 4.2%. That's the global average, of course powered by the likes of the Chinese, the Indians, etc. But, so if you're below 4.2%, we're underperforming. If we're above 4.2%, you're above the median, you're doing pretty well. Where it may be, Klang Klanene said earlier this week, maybe we'll get to 2. Our population growth rate's about 1.6, 1.7. So our starting rate is about 1.6, 1.7, because if you're not growing faster than your population growth rate, on a per capita basis, you're actually getting poorer. You with me? Because the same number divided by sort of population. So anyway, we are relatively underperforming as a country in growth terms. I'll fly for this. So what is inclusive growth? And bear with me for a few minutes and then we can go for a much needed coffee. Inclusive growth, 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, very few people were talking about inclusive growth. It's almost a new buzz phrase. So what does it mean? We must all go along together, not so. How do we do that? I think this is my answer. So, inequality undoubtedly is the